All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Lightbody. I head up the product management team and product marketing team here at Delphix, and I'm gonna try to do my session in about 18 minutes just to keep us on roughly on schedule. But obviously, you know, we'll control the pace and take as go as fast or slow as we need to get questions answered and really make sure you feel comfortable, you understand what the heck we do. You know, we're Delphix, let me just get to the next, there it goes, it works. All right, so what I'm gonna walk you through is a high-level overview of what Delphix does, our platform, what we provide. I'm guessing a lot of you have probably not heard of us before, or maybe heard of us a little bit, but probably not used our product. Has anybody used it ever? All right, Chris P. has done it. I'll try to get the other names, but yours is going to be very memorable now, Chris P. But that's great. So you've got some familiarity with the product, so that's wonderful. So what I'll try to do is get at least all of you up to a base level, and then we'll walk into some actual demos. Is that right? Woody here is going to share with you how the product works and interacts with it, and in particular how we intersect with the cloud. So. Let's start with apparently just my name.
You can do it.
One more time. Your wand is terrible, or the virus was installed successfully. All right.
I'm just with user error.
Oh, maybe that was backwards. Oh, that's what it was. The down arrow goes next. Okay, that kind of makes sense.
So you're saying? I
guess I'm going down. It was user error. Yes. All right. All right. Actually, one brief thing I'll just say. Just about me personally in the cloud, I was really excited to join Delphix. I joined the company last June. Prior to that, I had been at New Relic heading up product management there for 5 years, if you're familiar with the monitoring space. And one of the reasons, there were a few reasons I joined this company. One was quite simply, I knew some people that worked here, including the CEO, and it was a great opportunity to work with good people. But the other reason I joined was I had been personally kind of struggling in this space myself for basically the last 10 years in the form of various initiatives that I'd taken on around test automation and some startups that I'd pursued. So if any of you are familiar with the Selenium test automation toolkit, that's something I'd been involved with as a contributor and developer. And as I explored that, I quickly became fascinated with the idea of parallelization and the opportunities that the cloud brought with the elastic infrastructure to speed up your testing process. And almost immediately, one of the things I hit as I was pursuing that as a startup was the data problem. That you could go take 1,000 functional tests and run them at an application, and they would almost immediately start conflicting with each other if you were all rooted in the same application environment. And so back in 2008, before we had a cloud, I had started a company called Hosted QA, and I was like really wrestling hard with trying to do VMware and snapback data states, and it was not very effective. And so when I learned more about Delphix, I was like, that would have been super useful a decade ago. And so I feel like there's still this untapped opportunity around accelerating your application development and testing processes if you can get a better handle on the data. And so that's kind of my personal experience with cloud and why it connected to Delphix. I also later started load testing in the cloud company and had a lot of fun just early state in 2008, 2009, just pushing the limits of EC2, bringing up 1,000 or 2,000, 8 and 16 core machines, and just watching how even EC2 reacted to that. And it's come a long way, of course, itself. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Back then, that was kind of the limits. These days, that's, a drop in the bucket for their infrastructure. But the cloud has been something near and dear to my heart. So I'm really excited that Delphix is making it a focal point of our product strategy as well. So that's just my personal experience. We were founded in 2008, so right around when I was doing that load testing startup. This company also got started, and we've got a good set of leadership. Our founder is a gentleman named Jed. You see him right there. His background was in data backup and recovery, and the basic idea that formed Delphix was a recognition that there are better ways to do backup and recovery. and in particular enabled by some of the new innovations that were taking place at that time around copy on write file systems and the ability to quickly clone data sets and branch them off. And what was the innovative thing that got this company started was applying that in particular to Oracle databases, large-scale Oracle databases. Early on, our mission was predominantly around just making the lives of DBAs better, help them do faster restores, faster backup and recovery, faster cloning of large data sets and creating additional environments, and then some of the cost savings that came with that. It wasn't really until a few years ago that we recognized with the movement to the cloud and the movement of our enterprise customers that we could actually bring some of those benefits to the developers themselves. And I'll walk you through that story a little bit more. Our focus is not on small businesses. We are very much focused on some of the largest customers in the world. Got a slide on that right here, which is an interesting problem space in and of itself. Many of the top banks in the country and in the world use our products to manage large Oracle databases, 10, 20, 30, 40 terabytes in size. Entire inventories, you'll hear a little bit more later today, claim systems and warehouse data that's in these large data sets that need to adapt to the modern era where development upon that data needs to move much faster than it was before. And so what we've been doing is helping these these industries that have these large data sets move from where it might have taken weeks or certainly days, if not weeks, to provision an environment for development and try to get that down to where it takes just a few minutes. And that's a big focus, obviously, in the cloud. So here's our mission. At the core, what we're seeing from our customers is a tension that's taking place, and I'm sure you feel that as well in your own jobs. On one hand, organizations everywhere want to move faster and build new innovative applications, right? Nobody wants to get Airbnb'd or Ubered or whatever comes next. And so there are industries everywhere that are trying to stay ahead of the competition. And in order to do that, they're pulling all sorts of levers, right? There's CIOs out there saying, Agile, we got to do Agile. We got to do DevOps. We got to go into the cloud. We got to do open source and microservices. But one of the things they're starting to do, as I'm sure you know, in the trends, is they're recognizing data itself is a competitive advantage, and they need to get data in the hands of the people who need it, and that includes the broad category that we'd say data consumers, which would include developers, testers, data scientists, analysts, auditors. There's a wide range of people in the enterprise that are hungry for data and want to get it so that they can move the business initiatives faster. At the same time, there's a lot of tension pulling in the other direction, right? There's a headline almost weekly at this point around data breaches, data privacy concerns. The one this week, I'm sure you might have read about Panera. Anybody following that one was a little depressing. Did you? Yeah, Panera, poor Panera. Sorry, hopefully they're not a customer of ours. No, good, all right. Woo.
Hopefully they didn't lose my data.
Yeah, if you're not aware of it and you've got a Panera account, you might want to go get your credit card canceled and change your passwords if it was shared. But yeah, it's like these things are cropping up at an accelerating rate, and so enterprises are nervous. They don't want to be the next headline. And so how do you deal with this tension where it's move fast, get people access to the data, which is supposed to be all about breaking down barriers, and at the same time, don't be on the next front page of the New York Times for some terrible debacle. And so what we call this is data friction. It's this push and pull that's happening in enterprises around data. And our mission is to reduce or eliminate that friction around access to data. And that's the core of what problem we're trying to solve. So I assume that's, all right, I'll just keep moving. How do we do that? We do that with our product, the Delphix Dynamic Data Platform. What you're looking at here is a visual representation of the platform. We deliver our product in a few different ways. It's always some sort of virtual appliance, either in the form of a VMware image that you can run on-premise, or an Amazon machine image, or a Azure VM, that kind of thing. But it's always a VM. You attach block storage to it. So if you're on premise, it'd be some big SAN array. If you're in the cloud, you'd go provision an EBS volume and connect that over to it. And that's where the actual data is stored. And then you get those data operators, who are the ones that are wanting to make sure data is managed professionally and securely, to set up this platform so that you can flip the model around data access from being this like in the dark reactive model where people are trying to say, well, I need access to that data, but I don't know what else is out there, and can I get that? And then a ticket opens up, and it takes a few weeks before you actually get provisioned to a model where it's highly proactive and it's a self-service model. And that's what Delphix is all about. To reduce that friction, you need to enable the data consumers access to the data on their own, but you have to do it within the constraints of the enterprise policies, whether it's security policies, governance policies, data domain and data movement policies. This data can't leave Germany because it needs to stay in Germany because that's how our business operates. Those are all the kinds of things that need to be established if you're going to have full automation of access to data. So that's ultimately what this is. So walking you through from left to right, first step is that you need to connect data sources to that appliance. The typical way you do that is via some sort of database replication, for example. So we support unstructured files, we support databases, we even support in some cases applications, and in particular application configuration, which is part of the data management problem. And so there's different ways to get that data over. If it's unstructured files or flat files or config files, rsync or NFS mounts make the most sense. And so we have those as obvious integrations. If it's an Oracle database, then the best way we can connect there is via RMAN. And so we can actually get directly from a production Oracle database all the transactional logs that are changing along the way and feed that directly in. And the list goes on. There's kind of different mechanisms to connect to SQL Server or DB2 or HANA and whatnot. Once the data is connected, the first thing we do is virtualize it. And if you're not familiar with copy on write file systems or ZFS, we don't mean virtualize like hypervisors. We mean basically create that elastic time machine DVR-like property of data itself. So just curious, just to kind of quick measure, because we could geek out on here for a bit, but I don't want to do that if it's not needed. How many of you are familiar with like ZFS or copy on write file systems? Okay, about half the audience. All right, I'll do a quick primer then, and for those that aren't. At the core, a copy on write file system like ZFS, or there's also ButterFS is another one, and probably most recently I'm looking there and there and there. Look at the Apple devices and there. If you're on the latest Apple software, then you're probably also running APFS, which is a new copy on write file system. And they all have kind of the same properties, which is, as the name suggests, they don't actually write the changes. Well, I should say, the changes are not like a normal file system where when you make a copy, it's a whole independent thing. It's more like Git. Like think of it as branching, where you can kind of fork off from things. It doesn't technically track the deltas, but let's just say it does for the sake of simplicity. And as a byproduct of that, you get a highly efficient time machine of the data itself. And that's even though the technology's been around for a while, it's just now starting to kind of get into consumers' hands, quite literally, and starting to show up in software applications. You're going to probably meet other companies along the way, and if you've interacted with RDS Aurora, for example, in Amazon, there's elements of copy on write file systems that are underpinning some of that. But it's this wonderful thing that almost looks magical if you're not familiar with it at first, because it means you can make infinite copies of things or track all the changes of something in a highly space efficient manner. And just for fun, if you've never played with it and you've got a Mac, go grab like a gigabyte file and just make like 1,000 copies of it on your computer just for fun. And then look at the folder size. And it'll be like 8 terabytes. And you're like, but I only have a half a terabyte drive. How's that possible? And it's because of this. So what we're doing is we're getting all that data and we're putting it onto that kind of file system. Oh,
Question.
Great.
So, if you're taking data out of a structured file system, structured database, but you're placing it on a file system, you're changing to a certain degree the format there because you're taking something that was in a format of records where records would be updated, and you're now putting it onto something where the change unit is a file, because obviously the copy and write process is tracking changes to the file,
Yep.
or it might be tracking changes to the blocks within the
block
file
levels,
in
yeah.
your implementation.
Yep.
How do you reconcile the two, where one's coming from records that have to be then put onto something where you can keep track of it and keep it efficient?
Yeah, a couple things. One, most databases, in particular row-oriented databases, keep that data pretty nearby. So the blocks for a whole row are all physically located near each other. And so we work, what you're referring to is kind of the logical layer and then the more physical layer.
But the tools that you said, like Owlman and various other things, are not giving you access directly to the blocks of data that are being stored on the source system, in the sense that you're not getting access to the underlying storage of that platform. You're taking it out through a more logical interface that reads the records of the database, not the actual blocks of the storage in which it's stored.
Yeah,
So
we are for the most part working at that lower level. The RMAN stuff's a little tricky, and I don't know if I could fully answer it. I know we've employed one of the people who wrote a lot of RMAN, and so we've got some special secret sauce there. In other cases, like SQL Server, we're replicating to a staging database, and then we're connected in at the underlying file system level.
So for a lot of those, are you sitting in the data path, or are you not sitting in the data path?
When do you mean by the data path?
In terms of, if you've got physical storage and then you're putting, say, a file system on top and then the structured database on top of that, are you sitting somewhere within that stack before it gets written to physical storage?
Yes.
So are you impacting those source databases?
We are not. Yeah, we are. So we are typically working off to the side, and so we never get really in the way of production. Even in the case of RMAN, that's a more of a fire and forget kind of model. So we don't impact production databases, and that's not really our interest is in getting in the production space. So the typical deployment model we have with our customers is they're replicating to a staging environment off to the side, and then we're at the block level. But part of our product does work actually at the logical level as well. I'll get to that in just a second with the security step. And so we do kind of work at both angles. But on the space compression and space efficiencies, it's at that lower level. And then I think kind of at the heart of your question is, because that's a structured data set and we're working down here, that means we pretty much stay with like for like transformations, meaning we take an Oracle database and then we provision another Oracle database. We're not in the game of, say, converting that to Postgres or something along those lines.
So I'll just finish off with one last question because I don't want to derail your 18 minutes you were going to shorten time to.
Time's up, by the way.
As you're keeping track of that, you somehow have to match transactional changes at the application layer to block changes on the storage. So you have to tie the two up somehow.
Correct.
I'm guessing that's what you're doing as part of the way you implement it.
Yes, and depending on the policies that have been put in place by the data operators, and usually that particular policy would be more of a DBA or storage administrator, you can control how granular we do the snapshotting. And that impacts size. The more often we snapshot, obviously, like your DVR, the more things you save, the bigger it's storage you're going to need. And so typically we have customers who establish policies within Delphix where we might keep a pretty granular level of snapshots, potentially all the way down to transaction levels for a short period of time, and then maybe fall back to hourly or daily for the next month. The benefit of that, though, is if you're a developer or tester trying to recreate some production issue, you have a new tool at your disposal. You have, certainly the typical logs and metrics, and you can go look at the source code that was running in production. But now you have something that a lot of developers have never had access to. What was the database like at that moment just before, the issue? And we think that's pretty exciting too. It's not our biggest use case, but it's a pretty fun one. So the data gets virtualized. In some cases, it does get compressed. That's just a byproduct of the file system that it's being put onto. And a lot of data sources are not compressed. Flat file systems are often sometimes just plain text in an uncompressed manner. A lot of databases run uncompressed, and so we do have some storage savings just in that. But the real magic is that we are now in a position, once it's been continuously synchronized and virtualized, to make many, many copies of that without any additional costs of data storage, and to do it very quickly. The next step is this securing model, where security professionals are coming in and figuring out, what's the enterprise data policy, and how do we codify it in Delphix so that only the right people get access to the right data. So at the macro level, it's simple, role-based access control. Certain people can only see certain databases. But increasingly, enterprises want a more nuanced model where, everybody should be able to see almost any database at some level. It's a question of how much of the data, right? If you've got a 40 terabyte database, there's a lot of information in there, and maybe 10 terabytes are appropriate for you to see, and 30 need to be scrubbed and modified in some way before you should have access to it. And so that's where our security step comes in, and it's and the data masking capability. So you see a demo of that in a little bit from Jeff. But in short, we rewrite the records so that it looks like production, but doesn't actually have the sensitive production data. So there will be numbers that look like social security numbers. They are not the real social security numbers that were originally there. Some of the masking can go really simple to just straight, replace it with X's or stars. That's the simplest model. But we have some customers where it can get incredibly complicated, because obviously the application logic needs to still function if you're going to recreate a development environment or staging environment. And if you shove in a bunch of X's in a social security number field, you could break the application. And so more often, we work with our customers to help them devise a strategy to have as much realistic looking data. And we've had one, probably the most interesting one was a few months back, a customer who needed, were they in the shipping space? I forget what the exact detail was with this address. Insurance. And so in order to make sure that the insurance lookups mapped appropriate, they needed all the addresses scrubbed to be not the real addresses that match their customers. But they needed those addresses to still be in the same zip code of the original address.
It had to be valid.
And it had to be a real address in the same zip code of the original address. And so you can imagine that's a pretty complex transformation, but that's an example of the kinds of data transformations that we're trying to empower for our customers so that they can get that best of both worlds, the tension around moving fast and moving securely.
Excuse me.
Yeah?
You said for any database, is that okay for NoSQL data?
Yeah, so we support out of the box the big enterprise commercial databases, Oracle, SQL Server, HANA, DB2, Sybase, but we can also support through a couple different mechanisms pretty much anything that's out there. Our policy and our approach with...
Also MongoDB, Couchbase?
Yeah. So those could be done through a couple mechanisms. One, you can just get the files, the backing files of those in, and you can add your own scripts. And that's why we kind of talk about ourselves as a platform to help with the full orchestration and automation.
Okay.
And so that can just be done with the file system. You can also work with our professional services team to develop additional plugins. And over time, we're working to push that plugin toolkit externally. And that kind of speaks to our future, where we're moving from, kind of a out of the box, works with 5 data sets, to a model where you can get involved and add support for your own data set. Example, like Couchbase probably is on our, at some point on our roadmap to get done. It's popular enough, it's well known. Certainly Mongo, Postgres, MySQL, Neo4j. That's one I like to point to. It's not so widely used that I can promise that we'll just have native support for it, where we'll do all the orchestration with Neo4j. But there's no reason you shouldn't be empowered to bring that data onto the platform, run it through the benefits of the virtualization and the data masking, and automate the whole self-service access to it. So that's our direction.
Do you have any customers using this to, it might be useful like in a post-breach scenario to see what happens. Do you have anybody using it in such a way, or to track what happened after a disaster or a breach of security?
I don't know of one around a breach. I definitely know of one where a large media company accidentally dropped their video on demand, one of their key tables in production. And that was obviously a quick emergency, like immediately. And there was clearly a backup scenario that needed to come into play. And as you know, backup and recovery can take time. Right. And so we were not there for that purpose, but they looked to us and realized, oh, I can just go back 10 minutes and restore. And so we were that quick hot standby. I expect, given the sensitivity and the uptick of breaches and security concerns, there will be more of that. I mean, that's one of the things that's unique about us is we provide that audit trail. And so I think not just for forensic needs, but also machine learning training. There's definitely interest growing with our customers where they're seeing an opportunity to take what might just be a system of record database and not that interesting from a training standpoint. But now when they put the time dimension in there, they're starting to see new patterns emerge, and they can augment their machine learning practice with that kind of data. So I think it's a similar kind of model, taking advantage of the time. Yeah.
Talking a lot about structured data sitting in databases, but I know for enterprises, a lot of that information doesn't live in a database.
Yeah.
It live in flat files on file systems spread across the entire environment. So are you assisting in the discovery of those documents in any way, categorizing them and analyzing them?
We're not helping with those things at this point, but once they're known, our customers, and they're usually known by the application developers because they're dependencies of their application, they are bringing that data onto the platform. Additional discovery are things that we'll keep pushing on. Right now, we're putting a lot of our discovery emphasis on the sensitivity of the data itself once it's on board, and that really speaks to this next step. So not only establishing those policies, but helping you look at the data that's coming on board and running it through. We've got a few hundred different rules that we've evolved over time that can say, oh, that's some of the straightforward stuff is that's a 9-digit number. That's pretty suspect. You should make sure you consider masking that data before you release it to those data consumers. So most of the discoveries on when it's already on board, but we'll get there. Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, I'm kind of just going to skip ahead a little bit to keep us on schedule. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're packaging up all this data. It's been onboarded, it's connected, virtualized, secured, and then ultimately we need to get it to the data consumers who want access to it. And so we package it up in just a logical concept that we're calling a data pod. And what all that really is a representation of one or more of those data sets. You'll hear later today from one of our customers, it's not uncommon to have 30 or 40 databases that all make up part of a very complex application environment. And so you want to have those things kept in sync. So the benefit of packaging it up in this pod is that it's very lightweight because it's not actually terabytes upon terabytes of fully hydrated data, but it still can be kept in sync together. So you can bring all 40 databases along and restore back to a moment in time or pull the latest from production right in and do it all within a few minutes. And so that's one component of the data pod. And then the other part is that we're empowering those end users with their own self-service control. So they don't have to go and submit a ticket to IT and ask the DBA to restore a database or get the latest from production. Instead, they can click a little, one of those little buttons, the refresh button, that means get the latest from production. And so if they've been empowered with the appropriate policies, they can click that button and they'll get the latest data from production. And so then the other button, there's arrows going to the left. That's snapping back to a snapshot in time. If you bookmarked a piece of data, then you can just go right back to a pristine environment, which is really handy for test cases, especially in environments like SAP deployments where the data has to be in a very predictable state because you're dealing with really complex workflows and rules around your inventory and your third-party distributors and things like that. So we just package it up and we give those end users both a visual interface where they can point and click literally themselves, but more common is for our really advanced customers is to take advantage of the APIs so that they're not actually interacting with Delphix directly, but instead they're interacting with it indirectly through integrations into, say, their CI/CD pipeline, so that every time a build kicks off, it's pulling in the latest data and running all of its automated tests against that and ensuring that schemas migrate and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the most advanced scenario that our customers work with.
Patrick, you must be quite popular with the storage vendors because you're creating at least 100% additional space. Or whatever databases you have out there. And unstructured data.
I'd say we're not super popular with them because it used to be 500% or 1,000%. So we've reduced that footprint. And I think we've got it down to about as low as it can get. Our customers tell us often that we've saved them a ton of storage. Long term, that's not what we're in the game for. Like, that's interesting, but as you know, storage is is constantly a falling price. What we're most interested in is being that system of record of the data management policies themselves, and integrating into the workflows of those who need data in the most effective way possible so they can go as fast as possible. So what you're looking at here, for example, are all the different integrations and ecosystem that we try to integrate in with. Like I mentioned, the Jenkins integration is one that's pretty common and of interest of our customers. And we think there's a lot of value in doing that orchestration and automation. And where it really adds up is in the cloud, because what we're doing is we're giving highly elastic access to data, and you're marrying it up with highly elastic access to infrastructure. And so, on that point, I'll have to do this briefly. You're next, huh?
Just do it.
All right. Well, you'll just do it. You'll do this. Do you want?
I already have it.
You've got it. You're just going to show it. So forget talking to slides. Let's do it. All right. We're gonna go live. We're doing it live. All right. So Woody's going to walk you through this. So don't worry about what all these slides say. But the gist of it is the typical data migration. We'll get you copies of the slides. I don't know if you got that picture or not, but we can get you copies. The gist of it is that the typical data migration model has typically been more of like a copy. Get the data over there and then work with it, and then you need to kind of get the latest data over there. And at some point, you do that clear cutover if you're trying to get production into the cloud. Whether you're trying to go all the way to production in the cloud or you're just trying to do dev and test, as you'll hear from one of our customers later today, the nice thing about Delphix is that we do that continuous replication between different environments. And one of the things we can do is we can replicate only the mass data. So even though we have that time machine and that versioning, we can cut out from the version history the original data that was not masked. And that's through some clever engineering at the file system level. And so we can still give you access to the history and the version history of the data in the cloud, but not actually ship those social security numbers up there to start. And that's, if you're a big enterprise like our customers are, that's really nice and an opportunity for them to kind of build their own confidence in their cloud practices. Because I'm sure you've heard about it, right? Oops, we accidentally left our S3 bucket global readable. Big disaster on our hands. People are still getting used to how to work in the cloud, and we give them, some training wheels effectively by bringing the data in a desensitized way. And then ultimately you can, do that elastic infrastructure. We can spin up environments on demand and get data on demand to match all of those different environments. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll let Woody jump into the live demo. Are you just going out of here? And I'll answer some questions while he's setting up.
Can I ask a question about
sure.
the middle case?
Yes.
So can you talk about specifically what you're doing with Molina?
I'm going to ask Jeff maybe to speak to that. You've been more involved.
I'll come up here so we can be on the...
Jeff is our head of field services, including all of our technical sales and professional services and solutions.
So Molina, are you familiar with their
Very.
company business? So they've grown like a weed over the last decade, basically, alongside Obamacare, and they had to make dramatic changes to all of their applications to support all the new customers that they brought on board. And they hired a ton of people, but one thing they realized is the data footprint was going to be a real challenge, right? They're trying to enable a significantly larger number of developers and testers and all kinds of different data consumers, but they had a huge data footprint to start with, and it grew exponentially, right, as their business grew. And so originally they brought in Delphix because they're like, if you can make us lots of copies on a minimal storage footprint, that's really great for us. So we're interested in that. We'll start there. By the way, they're an all Windows shop, all SQL Server. Their applications run on, but then pretty quickly they realized the really big benefit for Delphix is not just that we saved on the storage footprint, but that now we can enable our developers and testers to have self-service control over the data that they're using. So Patrick mentioned that you can set this up in such a way that the developer themselves can be like, I want the latest version, the latest scrubbed version of the production data available in my personal development environment so I can continue, the work that I'm doing. I can run, if I'm a QA person, I can run iterative testing much more efficiently because I can run a test, get to the end, tell Delphix to set the state of my data back to the beginning point of that test. That only takes a few minutes regardless of the data size, and then run the next test, right? So for iterative testing, they can jam a lot more tests into the same amount of time than they could before. And so they're heavy users of data pods. They're creating them for everybody gets their own copy of the data set that they're working with. So they don't have shared environments anymore. They have self-service access to it. And they're doing this on a tremendous scale. So they have over 7,000 virtual database copies or 7,000 data pods created on top of Delphix at this point. And so it's a huge user base. It's a ton of data. And
part of their mandate was to hold all their IT costs flat.
Right.
Like I think their CIO had said, we're not increasing our budget, but this was during the era of Obamacare coming in, and they had to make massive changes to their systems in order to support it. And so, that was where they were met with this tension of like, how the heck do we move faster and adapt to this changing environment with a flat budget? And so that was part of our involvement.
And they also do the scrubbing, right? So as you can imagine, it's very sensitive information that they're dealing with. It's healthcare information. And so, and for HIPAA reasons, HIPAA compliance reasons, they have to scrub patient data before they can make it available to developers.
So before it goes into the pod, it's scrubbed?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after Woody, but yeah, the whole idea is you scrub the data as you collect it so that when it's delivered to anybody, it's known to be safe, right? They
Sanitized, essentially.
Yeah.